Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting weekend of the Human Performance Series. I'm Anthony Smalls, the coordinator and program manager for the SWAG initiative. If you are new to this is where we allow former or professional athletes, including people in the field of science and medicine that work with sports athletes, to come to these forums and speak to all of our guests, especially students, let them know about their career paths, how everything ties in together. So SWAG stands for Student Athletes with Academic Goals, and we just feel that you already have some preset skills that will transcend well into the field of the sciences and medicine and healthcare. So with that being said, I will now stop sharing the screen. We have an exciting discussion by Dr. David Putrino. He is the sports rehabilitation director at Mount Sinai, but he's so much more, and I'm gonna allow him to explain all of his great roles and everything that he brings to the table. So before we get started with that, I wanted to launch a quick poll just to get set the temperature here. If everybody can see the poll in front of them, it says hello all and welcome. Please use the word that best describes you for today. Happy, excited, curious, energetic. And the second question is, when you hear about the word rehabilitation, what comes to mind? You can pick multiple of the answers. We'll give you a few minutes to fill that out, and then we'll get started. Okay. A lot of answers coming in. Thank you very much. We appreciate your participation. And we will end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, share the results. Now, if everybody can see the results, I hope so. A lot of people are curious. When they think about rehabilitation, a lot of people think about arms and legs. And definitely, when I put the graphic together, when I was looking up different images and stuff like that, I thought it would be very interesting if Dr. Putrino discussed like the limbs and stuff like that. It's a lot of advancement. Technology triples every day, like 3 times. So technology is so far ahead, and we just need to catch up with with technology. So Dr. Putrino, we will pass it to you. You can give an introduction to how you got started, your background in sports, and how did you get into your role, and then start with a presentation. Thank you again.
No worries. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm just gonna share my screen and get this presentation going. Because I do build a lot of my background into the presentation. But as Anthony said, I work at Mount Sinai. I wear a few hats. One of those is working in rehabilitation. So I am the Director of Rehabilitation Innovation, which means my job is to find all of the newest and latest technologies that are out there that we think could really move the needle on helping patients that are in need of novel technologies. And we work to make those technologies mainstream. I also work in the sports performance world. And we, on that front, rather than thinking about it as rehabilitation medicine, we really think about it as high performance training. And we really think about how can we sort of hack into the physiology of athletes and amplify their performance. So less about sports medicine, someone's broken a leg, let's rehabilitate them to the point where they're going to go back to high performance, and more about, okay, you're already high performing, what can we do to make you even more high performing? So what I thought would be fun today would be to sort of discuss some of these ideas around high performance, discuss some of these ideas about how it merges with the practice of rehabilitation and how it can be different, and really have a bit of a discussion about all of these really fun and topical ideas about the world of high performance, the world of sports performance, and how we get involved. So by now you may have noticed that I've got somewhat of an odd accent. It's I'm from Australia originally. I'm actually from this part down here, right near the wine glass, and that's Perth, so southwest coast of Australia. And I did all of my undergraduate and my postgraduate work there. And so I started off life actually as a physical therapist. I was always really interested in two things. I loved working with athletes. I thought that was really interesting work. And so I was always, doing very different things with athletes, acupuncture, Pilates, core stability training, working with high performers in that regard. And then I was also very, very interested in neurological recovery. So working with stroke survivors, kids with cerebral palsy, a spinal cord injury, that sort of thing. And when I sort of like bubbled it all up in my brain, I really started to realize what I was interested in was skill acquisition. I was interested in motor control. I was interested in understanding how athletes get as good as they are at certain tasks. And I was interested in how to help people with neurological injuries to relearn tasks that they used to be good at. So these were the sorts of things that I realized I was passionate about. And to that end, I decided to do a PhD in neuroscience. So I once I'd completed my work in PT, I went on to study the sort of deep neurophysiology of motor control, trying to understand how motor commands are created, how different ensembles of neurons work together to produce voluntary skilled movements, and how we could disrupt some of those networks with what you see here, which is non-invasive brain stimulation. Sometimes we were using invasive brain stimulation, but really just trying to understand how the brain builds these models that allow athletes and injured individuals to produce skilled movements or not produce skilled movements. So, I'm not going to pull any punches here. Once I finished my PhD, a lot of people ask me if should I do a PhD? Like that's a big question that I think a lot of people ask. It's an investment. It's a huge investment of time. And in my mind, you really get two good things out of a PhD. And it's not what you think. It's not suddenly becoming a hyper expert in something. I think that pretty much all of my PhD work at this point is obsolete. It was obsolete within about 3 years of me publishing. So it's not like, oh my God, I made some massive contribution to the field that will never be forgotten. 1 in a million get to say that, and it's usually not because of them. It's because they got teamed up with someone important to do their PhD work under. So, the one thing is, it does give you a little bit of street cred. You got those letters after your name. You can say, look, I did something. It was hard. I completed it. Very few people do. And people do sort of respect that a little bit. So, not going to lie, that's a real thing that exists. I think the other thing that I learned about getting a PhD is it teaches you to both love learning, and it teaches you how to learn, and how to learn quickly and efficiently. Because when you're doing a PhD, that's what you got to do. You got to problem solve. You got to become an expert in a very narrow space. You've got to think about creatively how you're going to test the limits of that narrow space and push knowledge forward incrementally. And so it really gets you to a point where, again, if you're trained right, that you can do that in any field. Someone can place a new problem in front of you and you'll say, oh, okay, I know what to do here, and I know how to quickly become an expert in this, and then I'm going to, push this forward as well. So I'm also not going to sugarcoat. Australia is a nightmare place. You want to get out as quickly as you can. Everything wants to kill you, land and sea, and, amphibious. It's terrible. So, as soon as I got my PhD, I was out straight to New York, well, straight to Boston, then to New York. Boston's also a nightmare place, different reasons though. And I was really fortunate to land at Mount Sinai under the leadership of Joe Herrera, who's the system chairman for rehabilitation and human performance at Mount Sinai. And we wanted to build this model of, as I said earlier, integrating novel technologies into the space of rehab medicine and into the space of human performance. And so we started building these centers that focused on that. And, you know, we now work with a whole bunch of different technologies. And although these aren't all sports performance related, just to give you a bit of an orientation to some of the rehab technologies we work with, you know, we work with very low cost, low tech technologies, you know, blood pressure cuffs, pulse oximeters, things like that, for building out remote patient monitoring platforms that allow us to, you know, study and monitor our patients more closely and more carefully so that we can, you know, intervene earlier, which will become more important as we start to talk about sports performance, because you know, everything I've learned from the rehab side of things is the more you know, the more objective knowledge you can gather about a patient that you're trying to rehabilitate, the more you can do and the faster you can do it. So even though the technology around a lot of remote patient monitoring is previous generation and it's not that impressive, the ability to integrate it into smart and connected systems is impressive, and it really makes a big difference in patients' lives. So we work sometimes on the low-tech spectrum, sometimes on the really high-tech spectrum. I'm actually speaking to you right now from Pittsburgh because we are launching a new multi-site clinical trial at Mount Sinai and here in Pittsburgh with this technology, which is called a stentrode. So this is an endovascular stent. It enters your body through the jugular vein, gets into a large vessel in your brain called the superior sagittal sinus, and while it's there, it can record brain messages. And as you're thinking about, you know, say moving your hands, it can pick up that signal, and you can use that signal to control a mouse. So we're just starting a new clinical trial with this brand new technology to allow people with ALS, you know, motor neuron disease, who are fully locked in, to control things in their computer with just thought processes alone. So sometimes we get to work with really high-tech technology as well, which is really cool and very exciting. We work with very low-cost technology. We do a lot of virtual reality therapies for chronic pain and for visualization in athletes and for a number of other conditions that we're trying to treat. And some of the stuff that we've found is most effective is when patients have complete autonomy to interact with the content where cost isn't a barrier. So, you know, basically we host our virtual reality content on YouTube. We give them a Google Cardboard. We give them a cell phone. Well, they typically have a cell phone, and that's it. They can access their therapy just by watching YouTube, which is super exciting and very novel for the idea of highly scalable, low-cost health solutions. But then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, you know, we're working with exoskeletal robotics for people with spinal cord injury, severe stroke, traumatic brain injury. And these are expensive technologies, but these are technologies that we're trying to make less expensive by increasing the adoption and the uptake across the health system so that the companies can produce more of them and the cost goes down, and then more people can access the services. But super exciting technologies nonetheless. And then we work all across the lifespan. So we've got a children's center down in Union Square where we see kids basically from birth, and then all the way through to older adults at the end of life. So we have a very broad scope in terms of the work that we do. And then in addition, we also work across the performance spectrum. So, you know, this is one of our patients that we've been working with for many, many years. His name's Tony. He has ALS, and he's so severely affected by his ALS that all he can move is his eyes. So we do a lot of work with him with adaptive technology and technology that allows him to have a little bit more agency and independence using eye movements. But then that's one end of the performance spectrum that we work with. And then right on the other end of the performance spectrum, we work with really high performing athletes, Brooklyn Nets, Red Bull. This here pictured is Miles Chamley Watson, who is two-time Olympic fencer and multiple time world champion, awesome athlete. So we really try to encompass the entire spectrum, because I think that you always end up having really great ideas that can be influencing each field. And I think that one of the things that has been really special for me to see, since not a lot of people work across this entire spectrum, is we cross-pollinate a lot. A lot of the ideas that we learn from working with people with severe neurological conditions are actually very applicable to high performance athletes and vice versa. And so a lot of the way that we like to think about it is this idea that performance is a spectrum, and we should be using we should be using all the tools in our toolkit across the entire spectrum of human performance. We should never be limiting what we think our patients are capable. It's up to them to tell us what they think they're capable of and where they want to stop their rehabilitation. So if someone who's just had a stroke says that they want to fence in the Olympics, we got to get them there. That's our job. Our job is to support that dream and that vision. So it's been a real honor working in this space and working with all of these amazing individuals. And so I wanted to spend a bit of time today sharing some of the projects that we're working on, some of my insights that I've had working with all of these amazing athletes and amazing individuals, scientists and parents and family and so on. And then just open up to some discussion. So one of my first performance partners that I really got engaged in was Red Bull. At the time, it was really surprising to me that Red Bull had a high performance arm to them, because when I first learned about this, it was I think it was 2013, and I just thought of Red Bull as a drink, and then they said to me, do you want to come and join our high performance division and do some work with us? And I said, so what, you give people Red Bull and see if they perform better? Is that what's going on? They're like, no, it's not about the drink. Forget about the drink. We sponsor about 900 athletes worldwide, and our only mission is to just make them better at their sport. So then I started to, sort of peek behind the curtain. And my first project that I got to sit in on was Red Bull Stratos. I didn't really have too much to do with this project. They sort of just said, look, sit in the corner and listen and learn. And so this was the project where, Red Bull dropped Felix Baumgartner out of the stratosphere, and he had to parachute back into Earth. So it was a pretty intense project. And it was such an amazing thing to see, because from my perspective, as I sat in on this project, the project was almost failing when I showed up. They were almost ready to pull the pin. And the reason why was because they really couldn't get Felix to sort of meld with the performance team. Felix was an extraordinary and highly experienced parachuter and parachute athlete, and he had done everything that you could do with a parachute and a few things that you can't do. And he was a very individualized performer, and he couldn't understand that this idea of doing something that had never been done on this level before required a team. to keep him alive. He was like, no, 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 I'm the star. I need to do this. And it wasn't until the Red Bull performance team came in, worked with him a lot, worked with the science team a lot, did a whole bunch of group bonding exercises, did a whole bunch of individualized psychology interventions, and so on and so forth, that the perceptions started to change. The team clicked and started to work together. And we actually got to a point where the team was like, okay, I actually think we can pull this off. And sure enough, they did. And this was when we started, this is when I started to realize that human performance is this very complex interplay of a lot of different features that all need to click together in order for athletes to be able to get out there and do what they need to do. And, this is, believe it or not, this model of, everything that you're seeing here is a gross simplification. All of these things are important, and for each one of these things, for neuroscience and cognition and genomics, I could build out another model for each of the components of those, and another model for each component, and so on and so forth. But this is what we did for every Red Bull athlete. Every single athlete had a cogwheel model like this, where we understood which were the big cogs for that athlete and which were the small cogs, which ones didn't matter at all, which ones they had a natural affinity for, which is versus the ones that had to be trained. But every single athlete, when we think about them like this whole interdisciplinary, multi-dimensional model that needs to be addressed. And with Red Bull, we're always getting to do super exciting and very, very interesting performance exploration. Red Bull has this on lock. They know how to think about athletes. They know how to track what they think are the important components of performance. And so now what they do is they're always looking for more. So we get to do really, really cool projects. And one of the things I've learned working with Red Bull is, in terms of someone working in sports performance as opposed to being an athlete, if you want to succeed in the space, the answer is always yes. Someone asks you, can you do this? Answer is yes. It's a very different world. It's a very different life. It's not like, in medicine, there's a tendency to hyper specialize and say, well, this is my area and I only do this, and don't ask me to do other things because liability and, upsetting other departments and so on and so forth. In sports performance, you got to do 20 things at once. Oh, you need me to do the neuroscience and run water to the athletes? Sure, no problems. You need me to stay out till 2 a.m. today? No worries. The answer in sports performance is always yes. Whatever is best for the team. It has to be this collectivist culture over an individualistic culture. And when you get a team of individuals like that together, both on the sports side, so the athletes who understand, what they're buying into, as well as the scientists who understand that what they're doing is for the good of the team and the coaching staff and so on and so forth, you get to do some really cool things and really interesting things. One of the projects pictured here is, this was a project, we call it Project Endurance, that we had a series of 3 of these projects where we were pushing athletes to absolute muscle failure. So we had hyper endurance athletes, we were pushing them to failure, and we were trying different strategies to get one more rep out of them once their muscles were at absolute failure. And it was this fascinating project where we tried non-invasive brain stimulation, we tried working them at ultra high altitude, we tried working them at ultra low altitude, we tried working them in different temperature and atmospheric conditions, all with the mission of trying to understand, okay, how do we get that one last push out of these muscle fibers that have been pushed to complete exertion. It was an amazing project to be a part of. We learned a ton. Cliff notes on this where we could not get non-invasive brain stimulation to work. So if many of you have seen things like Halo Neuroscience and some of those other transcranial direct current stimulation devices, we could not get any of that to get that one last push out of these individuals. But we did learn a lot of really interesting knowledge about how changing altitudes can really change people's ability to exert themselves and push through exertion. So, you know, we learned a lot about how to periodize training at sea level versus at certain high altitude environments, so that we could start to train athletes in a different way based on what outcomes we wanted and when. So Project Endurance, working with Red Bull, that was a really you know, interesting experience. We've also done a ton with Red Bull on surf science. So as you might imagine, being able to rig up all the biometrics that you need on a surfer or a water sports athlete is sometimes quite challenging. And so surf science was all about really seeing what we could do in terms of EEG, eye tracking, biometric monitoring, muscle activation, pressure sensing, all of the stuff that we wished we knew about our surfers to give insights into the coaches, but you can never do because they're in the water. So surf science was a really great project. We were out in Salina Cruz, Mexico, and we got to run a whole bunch of surfers through some amazing protocols out on the water. We broke a ton of equipment. I will say that, you know, not everything went according to plan, and I learned a lot about waterproofing, bootleg waterproofing with silicone gel, but we did get some really interesting data, never before seen data, you know, just real simple stuff about, you know, how a surfer paddles, and, you know, just building, you know, just breaking down the kinematics of paddling in the water, which hadn't been done before, and allowing a coach to watch it from the shore in real time and provide real-time feedback out to the surfer, whereas ordinarily the coach would have to wait for the surfer to finish their session and come back in, and then they're delivering 90-minute-old advice, which is really, you know, quite challenging if you think about what other coaches get to do on the fly immediately. We also do a ton of work with Red Bull's breakdancers. All of the work that we typically focus on with these guys, because their schedules are so tight and so intense, is self-care, recovery, fighting jet lag, how to, you know, nutrition consultation, how to eat healthy when you're on the road on a tiny budget, in a random location, because the breakdancers in Red Bull, they go all over the world, and they're often in like really tiny cities in the middle of nowhere where you can't really, you know, wander into the supermarket and find a grass-fed organic thing. So working with these guys on self-care and recovery is really, really important, and it extends the duration of their career significantly. We also work with some of the Red Bull big wave surfers. So the project in Salina Cruz was regular wave surfers. This is big wave. We are right in the middle of a project right now where we've stuck a couple of these guys into MRI scanners to try and understand what's going on with their brains. Why are they able to psych themselves up enough to get on a wave like this? This is out in this is Navarre in Portugal, which is a really well-known spot for, you know, 40, 50-foot waves. And as we are seeing in our results, there is definitely something different in the way that these guys evaluate risk and evaluate threat that allows them not to be fearless, but to understand that this is not, you know, that this is a threat that they can manage, which seems to make the difference between someone who's going to jump on a wave like this versus someone who is, technically speaking, just as skilled, but not in a million years going to jump on a wave like this. And so understanding that has been really interesting, both from an athletic performance example, as well as you know, when we work with high performance soldiers and elite performers in warfare, these sorts of topics come up as well. And we also have been doing a lot of work with cyclists, seeing the effects of music and whether music and enhanced music, so music plus things like haptics, high level vibration, can increase their power output when they're cycling during an event. So I'll finish up talking about the cool Red Bull projects just by giving a bit of insight into one day Andy Walsh, who was the guy who single-handedly built the Red Bull performance program from the ground up. I asked him, in his opinion, what are the most important things? You know, like obviously we have this big spectrum of things that make elite performers, but I was like, across the board, is there anything that's jumping out at you as something that's common across all styles of performers? And interestingly, you know, his answer was all about risk. So he said that these guys have elite risk analysis skills. So they're very, very good at being able to say, I'm going to take this chance because in my current skill set, in my current flow state, in my immediate performance state that I'm in right now, I know I can do this at a very high level. And, you know, and this, interestingly, this explains why, you know, these stories about when one player decides to go against the coach's advice and scores the winning goal, or, you know, all of those stories that are sort of folklore in sports performance. When you talk to Andy, he's like, that's a terrible example for the rest of us, because that only happens 1 in a million times, and it only happens because that person was so elite that they could analyze the risk and say, in this case, the risk is warranted because I have good self-awareness of where I'm performing right now, better than my coach, and so I know I can do it. And then the other thing is risk tolerance. So, you know, the other thing that we see a lot of is amazing performance under pressure from these guys. So, you know, it's following on from point number 1, where they make the call, where they say, you know what, I know the coach thinks I can't do it right now, but I know my body, and I know that I'm in flow state, and I know that I'm, you know, I'm performing well today and I can do it. Once you make that decision and you know that your career rides on it, having a steady hand while you're doing all the things you need to do to win, that's the next thing. So risk analysis and risk tolerance really scored higher with Andy, and I think about that a lot, so I figured I'd pass that along so you guys can think about it a lot as well. So moving on, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about some of the novel technologies that we're looking into right now, you know, in various different environments that I think are cool and next level. We're doing a lot of work with kinematic analysis, but kinematic analysis that we can capture from 2D video. So what you just saw there was this is actually one of the Brooklynettes. She's a dancer from the Brooklyn Nets cheer squad, and we captured this video on a smartphone. So we're holding the smartphone up, captured the video, and then we applied a computer vision algorithm on top of it, which allowed us to get what you can see here, which is hyper detailed joint angle analysis. And what we've been doing with this work is we've been showing that using a machine learning algorithm, we can ping an athlete and a coach if someone's movement patterns change in a direction that would indicate that they're fatiguing, that they're increasing their injury risk, and that allows us to intervene earlier. So being able to, you know, just have a coach or an assistant coach or someone like that hold up their phone and say, hey, do this movement. And typically the assessment takes, you know, 3 seconds. Just do this movement for me. And then for us to be able to automatically analyze it and say, you know, there's a little bit of instability at their hips that wasn't there last week, or at their knee. This has been really interesting and really important for a lot of what I think is the future of sports performance and risk management. We're also doing a lot with other biometrics. So we've got this great technology from a company called HappyTech that allows us to capture heart rate variability on our athletes without a smart device. Now, there have been a few of these out there in the past that have been a little bit snake oily, but this technology is actually, it's CE marked in Europe. It has designation as a Class 2 medical device. And they're currently going through FDA process as well. And it's heart rate variability is such an important metric for athletes. It gives us a good overall understanding of their autonomic nervous system health. And but it's always very, very difficult to capture and interpret across a normative span of data. You typically need a good profile of what that individual athlete's heart rate variability is like. And so the ability to capture it on a daily basis without any sort of peripheral or faffing about with, putting a chest strap on or an EKG on, this is really, really valuable and super exciting. We're also doing a lot of remote cognitive assessment. This has a lot of relevance in concussion, as you might imagine, but also as we're starting to move a lot of our focus into esports, because esports is becoming, one of the most rapidly growing areas and arenas of sports performance. The ability to rapidly and accurately test someone's cognitive ability becomes super important because esports is 100%, a cognitive performance game. So it's been really great to start playing with some of these technologies that allow us to just sort of drop in a quick cognitive assessment battery. We're starting to also play around with these clinics where we integrate a lot of these computerized systems. So this is a clinic that Mount Sinai developed in collaboration with a company called Longevity, and it's called Lab 100, and it allows you to not only walk through a very futuristic and nice experience where a lot of biometrics are being captured all at once, but then at the end of it, it gives you a sort of a health passport where you get to see what your numbers are and where those numbers sit in relation to the normative population. So you can start to understand your health in context, in relation to individuals that have your demographic parameters. So it's been really an exciting innovation in general human performance practice and precision medicine practice. And we've been starting to work with a lot of professional sports organizations on building versions of this sort of an experience into their performance programs, because we've learned that, athletes are really curious to see where they lie on a spectrum. And so this level of visualization is, there's never too much information for those guys. They always want more. And this level of information is really valuable to them. The other thing that we've been starting to play around with is this idea of building out innovative recovery environments. So this is an example of what we dubbed a recharge room. We initially actually built these, we initially designed these for the Brooklyn Nets to give their players rooms that they could enter into post-game and just have their physiology calm right down. Because one of the things that we were struggling with was the players would come off the field, they'd be completely hyped up, and then they'd lay in bed on their smartphone till 2 a.m. And then the next day they'll be trashed. They can't train. If they've got another game the next day, forget about it. They're just not going to perform at their best. And so we started to build these rooms for the athletes. The pandemic hit. So what we actually did was we took the designs and we started turning, what you're seeing here is actually an emergency department triage tent in New York. that has been converted into one of these recharge rooms, what we saw from the data that we collected was that 15 minutes in a room like this reduced stress levels by 60%. So what we were able to see was a really profound impact of specially curated environment on body physiology. So this is becoming hotter and hotter. There's a lot of people that are interested in building these sorts of environments, not just for relaxation, but for also, the other way. Can we hype someone before we get them on the court? Because, obviously, if we can get them in a heightened performance state, that's going to be great as well. So these are things that we're starting to scratch the surface on that I think are really, really innovative and exciting. And they're all centered around this one simple concept, which is, if at this point, if you want to boost performance in your athletes, you need to know as much quantitatively as much as you can about your athletes, and you need to know it as quickly as possible. So you can always be adapting, and you can always be optimizing, and you can always be creating more and more nuance to what you're offering these athletes. So the final thing I'll chat about, and then we can have some discussion, is just what's next, what's in the future, what are we exploring that we think is innovative and cool. I think, a whole theme that you'll find through both this presentation and my career is that breaking down those barriers between sick and high performing is really important. And so we do a lot of work in inclusion and sports performance. What you can see here is one of our teams, esports teams. They're called the Quad Guards. They're esports team, professional esports team made up entirely of quadriplegics who have had a spinal cord injury. And these guys are awesome. They're like really talented esports athletes who can kick the ass off of most non-spinal cord injured esports athletes. So as we've started to get them involved in more and more esports events, we've been learning so much about equipment that can completely revolutionize the game. And we've started creating adaptive esports tournaments where we're learning a ton about novel technologies, performance metrics, and so on and so forth. And it's been really great working with these guys and really just shaping the world of esports while we're doing it. Similar to the Quad Guards, we're also working with a lot of adaptive athletes who play more physical sports. And so, this is actually one such athlete, Aaron. He's a former Red Bull sponsored motocross athlete following a pretty high level spinal cord injury. He's now working to get involved in more and more athletic events. So in this particular case, God knows why, because this is not my idea of a fun time, but Aaron is very, very passionate about competitive stair racing. So this is him using a novel exoskeletal device to climb 34 flights of stairs in Chicago. He dragged me kicking and screaming along for the ride. But it was an absolutely unbelievable, exploration of what is possible in a human being who was told he would never move his legs again, let alone walk again or climb stairs. And at the same time, we were prototyping an entirely novel type of exoskeleton that we're also interested in seeing if we can enhance recovery times in sports performance in athletes who are going through ACL reconstruction, or they've broken a leg and they need to, we want to mobilize them faster, and so on and so forth. So again, when we lean into this rehabilitation world, it gives us this novel opportunity to cross-pollinate into the sports performance world, especially when we get to work with incredible individuals like Aaron, who they have the sports performance background, so they can give us insights and they can say, yes, this would have worked for me when I came off my bike and broke my leg, or no, you need to do it this way and you need to do it that way. And so, you know, again, it's an absolute privilege to work with this caliber of human and high performer. The other thing I think is just really taking the world by storm that we need to, you know, think about a lot and revolutionize a lot is sports psychology, sports psychiatry, not just when people are unwell, but when people are well and need to perform at a higher level. You know, we're learning more and more every single day about not just how to optimize individual performance, but how to optimize collective group performance. And through my work with the Nets and a couple of other high-level sports teams, I can tell you that this is a direction that everyone is interested in. How in the draft do we identify people who are going to be pro-social, team players, natural leaders, have a growth mindset, you know, all of these things that we keep seeing time and time again. Not only do they make an absolute champion, but they make a champion team as well. And so this is an area that I think is just growing enormously right now. I think one of the best books I've read so far is The Culture Code. So if you haven't read it, this is basically sitting on the bedside of every person in sports performance right now. So even if you read it and you think it's you know, it's novice and low level, at least know every single person in sports performance has read it. You know, Sean Marks, who's the GM of the Brooklyn Nets right now, he's quoted in this because they spend a lot of time discussing the San Antonio Spurs and Popovich's focus on building culture over everything else. And, you know, one of the most insightful things I think I've heard Sean talk about on the topic of sports performance and building the right team is, you know, if you guys don't follow basketball, the Brooklyn Nets are doing pretty well this season. And they traditionally have not done so well in previous seasons. But since Sean took over as GM, they've sort of just been doing this great rise to fame. And this, you know, this season they've taken on a lot of like real kick-ass players, absolute superstars. And it was interesting to hear Sean say that, you know, when he first joined, he didn't make the big hires because he didn't think the team was ready for it. He had to build the culture first before he brought the high performers on. And this idea of having to, you know, in a team environment, having to earn your high performers, it's a very sophisticated notion. And I don't know that a lot of people get that. And for me, it's just such a really, you know, it's a very good answer to the, you know, to the question of, you know, oh, why don't you just go and buy up all of the highest performing players and put them all into one team? Well, this is why, because if you haven't built the culture first, it doesn't matter if you have all of those high performers kicking around. They're not going to play well together, and they're not going to understand that they're part of a culture. And obviously, you know, the other piece on this is The Last Dance. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen that, go watch that, because that could just as well be a perfect case study of how to build a high performing culture, and how, you know, how a team can come together and click to do absolutely amazing things. So I'm going to finish up there because I really want to have some time for questions, although I do have one more slide that I do want to share because everything that I've just discussed is a ton of work, but there's so many amazing people that helped me along the way. This is not just me. It's never just me. It's never just one person. So I just wanted to quickly acknowledge all the incredible people who helped to allow me to talk about this content. So now I will stop.
That was mind-blowing and amazing. This is the first time I was just like so intrigued by data. Like a lot of times, especially in like college debate classes, when people bring up data, you always argue like, well, that statistically doesn't make sense. Or how can you prove that? But this is the first one I'm like, data actually helps grow technology and grows performance because everything you're collecting, even just the layout of the you said the health passport was just amazing. I saw that Phil, you had your hand up. Do you want to come off mute and ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure. That was actually the applause thing for the talk. So thanks, Dr. Putrino, for being here today. Yeah, I'm a first year medical student at Mount Sinai, and I have a like pretty significant sports background. So all this stuff is just incredibly fascinating to me, and could talk about it for hours. But yeah, I guess one question I had sort of from the like medical perspective is how you mentioned teamwork a lot and all the things that you do. What is the interplay like between kind of the medical team and the research team as far as both like developing these technologies, but also like implementing them? So for example, the exoskeletons, how easy is that to just immediately integrate that into someone's rehab in the hospital, or do you need FDA approval, things like that? Just curious your take on that interplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's a talk in itself. I think the important thing is building a pipeline, and so for the Abilities Research Center at Mount Sinai, the pipeline that we build is all about making a very seamless transition from here are technologies that are non-significant risk FDA, designation technologies, but don't yet have FDA approval. So we're going to create IRB approved protocols where we can study their use in patient populations, but very, very easy for someone on the clinical side to refer over to us to get that. Then there are the sort of in-between technologies. They're novel technologies, but the hospital isn't ready to adopt them yet. And we have a specialized clinic that allows patients to just funnel in and request the technologies, and then we find ways for their insurance to pay, or so on and so forth. But we've found both a legal and policy way to make it possible for people to easily access the tech, and then that makes a seamless transition for us to, if the technologies are going well, if the patients are asking for it a lot, and there's rave reviews about them and everyone loves them, it's a very easy ask for us to, get up in front of Dr. Herrera or get up in front of the dean if necessary and say, this should be integrated, across the hospital because patients love it. It's doing a good job. It might cost us a little bit of money up front, but long term, it's going to save us money or make us money or whatever the case may be. And so, building out pipelines like that in clinical medicine, in sports performance as well, and every environment's different. Like with the nets, the medical side is separate from the performance side. So we're all, working with we're on the performance side at Mount Sinai, and we're working with the players. We're working with the physios, the strength and conditioning coaches, and they're coming to us with problems, and we're solving the problems to enhance performance. The medical side only steps in if there's like a medical problem. Someone's torn an ACL. Okay, I'm going to come in and intervene. And it's interesting to see that medical's cut off from us, and it's all contract stuff, right? I mean, because they're HSS and they have an advertising contract, and they're like, don't add us unless, we're not going to be here unless there's a surgery to do. Whereas when you work in the Red Bull environment, everything's integrated. So everyone's talking to everyone, team approach, big team meetings, so on and so forth. And so it's always a little bit different wherever you go based on what the tradition is and so on. But yeah, I think so long as we create some sort of framework and some sort of process map for people to follow, integrating all of the new things becomes relatively easy.
Awesome, thank you. That makes a ton of sense. Appreciate it. I'm gonna grab a copy of the culture code too.
It's a good read.
Mhm. Does anybody else have any questions? Since we have such a small group, I see Jordan Alexander. Thank you for coming. I believe that is Sharon Knight. I've seen her name on the meetings. Do you have any questions by any chance? Okay. And then we have our swag director, Dr. Reginald Miller, on as well. Dr. Miller, do you have any specific questions? And then we also have Mr. Russell Schuler, who's a part of the SWAG network. He has a program called Youth Education Through Sports. It helps high school athletes with SAT prep, and also he runs the Smart Ball Basketball Classic in Harlem. So we have a nice.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
This is Russell Schuler speaking. Sorry for my photo. What I would have is that what age does the high performance training start in the tracking, development, and all those types of things?
Well, and hi Russell, by the way, good to see you again. You know, sport to sport, it's always different. And right now, in terms of Mount Sinai's program, the Performance 360, we only get involved in adult sport, where we have plans in P360 to build out a pediatric program over the next couple of years, just as we've started to build out our pediatric center. But, you know, in the different sports, you know, Major League Baseball has academies all over the world, typically in places where they have high concentrations of success. So, you know, they'll have an academy in Cuba, they'll have an academy in the Dominican Republic, they'll have an academy in a bunch of South American countries. Same with soccer. There's the academy model. So they will bring people in sort of, you know, 11, 12 years old and start building people up. Typically, you know, from my experience, and growing up in Australia as well, this is a very real thing. The Australian Institute of Sport is very passionate about developing kids as early as we can get them in, as early as they're showing aptitude in a sport. We build them into a specialized program, which I think is why Australia has per capita, you know, a high level of success in global sporting, you know, in the global sporting arena, because they have such an organized Institute of Sports Performance. And so most of the sports, you know, they tend to start early. Basketball is the same, you know, as I'm sure you know. There's a lot of scouting early on, even in high school. And I really don't think you can start too early, so long as you're, of course, mindful of the child's health and well-being.
Right. And how does that impact non-traditional versus traditional sports? I see a lot of non-traditional sports have been the focus of the studies.
Yeah, I think in terms of starting early, it's all about integrating a sport into your life. So I mean, the esports athletes, they all, I mean, you ask them when they started gaming, they were gaming at 6 years old, you know, they were gaming early. There are very few esports athletes that picked it up late in life. And, you know, the career length of an esports athlete on a professional level is actually really short right now. This is something that we're trying to focus on, but they burn out early. So these are really good questions that I don't have solid answers to, but I think that I think that across the board, performance will always, you know, like be a little bit better if you start early, and it's just naturally part of your routine to be involved in these sports. But I do think that you need to be really mindful of this idea of burnout in athletes by either starting them too hard or building it up to a point where they're putting way too much pressure on themselves. And so it's a very delicate balance to walk, I think, by getting kids involved too early in a professional mindset. But if performance can be done, if building a performance mindset can be done early on in a way that promotes a genuine love for the sport, as opposed to, you know, I have to be the best right now and everything's riding on it, and, you know, years and years of pressure. I think that makes all the difference.
Okay, another question that I'm thinking is how, when we talk about developing the developing student athletes at the youngest ages, you're going to get as good as you're going to get. So now we're trying to talk about high performance. If your high performance is not even good enough, won't be good enough, how does that translate into future success in sports?
So if I'm getting this right, so are we talking about an athlete that you see that you're sort of like, you know what, you're good, but you're not going to be great?
Let's just say, no, that becomes a realization. That's the bottom line. So let's just say we are developing, let's say, middle school student athletes to become high school athletes, become collegiate athletes. With a let's say a mindset of aspirational becoming professional, just at the performance level. How is that measured? How is that determined? How is that directed when we know progressively, not to say burnout, but physical exhaust, because that's the best you're going to become at a certain group, a certain age? How is that? Is that something to think about or have been thought about?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and this is actually some of the work that we're starting to map out as we strategize for our pediatric performance center, is exactly this issue, because what you're hitting on right now is the biggest problem with the academy model across the world, which is they burn out a lot of kids. You'll hear the stories of a lot of kids who just get pushed to the absolute limit, even though the coaches know that they're never going to be top tier, but they're there to be competition to the others. And I think that what needs to happen is putting more resources into creating the right mindset and expectations at the different tiers of, you know, at the different age ranges. So like when you're in middle school, this is all about fun and building out love for the sport and education and so on and so forth. Although you have a strong focus on performance, there's a lot of other stuff. And I think if I could build the ideal model, it would be, you know, doing a lot of what SWAG is trying to do as well, which is at every point signaling to the kids in the academy that there are lots of options. Being the top athlete doesn't necessarily need to be the only option available to them. There's lots of things that they can branch off into if being an athlete isn't working out for them anymore. And I think that creating that level of options within an academy is what needs to happen to make people feel safe, to try as hard as they can, but still know that if they don't make it on this level, there's another level that they can make it on.
Understood. Thank you.
No worries. Great questions, hard questions.
Anybody else have any questions that want to come off mute real quick and ask a quick question? So if not, then I have a question in terms of the pushing past limits. How important is it for not just athletes, but for people with your research background to decide how to go beyond certain limits? Is that just something that you're saying we want to see how far it should go, or is this something that is negotiated between, say, scientists and athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's always we don't choose, the athlete chooses for sure. Again, an interesting anecdote was when Durant came over to the Nets after he tore his Achilles. One of the first things he said about the Nets performance program was, if I were at the Nets when my Achilles was feeling off, I wouldn't have torn it. And the reason was because he was saying, I don't feel right. And they said, just go out there and play, because like, it's playoffs, don't worry about it, you know? And one of the things that we always do is we're always checking in with the athletes. We're always like, if you don't feel 100%, we're not going to put you on. If you tell us it's not right, we're not going to push. But, you know, one of the things that we were doing with the Project Endurance was we have these hyper endurance athletes. So everyone on that project was, you know, these are cyclists that will ride 1,200 miles in a race, you know, just wild races that they get involved in. And they're, you know, the thing that bugs them is they feel like they have this biological reserve that they could tap into when they're right at the limit, but they can't, they know it's there, you know, like they're like, I know that, you know, if I got to that, you know, 1,100 miles and I feel like I don't have any gas in the tank, I know that if I saw my kid in trouble, I'd still be able to push further, but I can't access it right at the end of the race where I need it the most. Mm-hmm. And that was what we were trying to do there. And it was always with, you know, the full sort of collaboration of, are you feeling okay? Can you do this? Can you push forward? But we do know that that biological reserve exists, and trying to understand if there's a way to, again, not always push yourself to the point where you're at muscle exhaustion and, you know, you're going to get rhabdo or some horrible, some horrible biological response to pushing yourself too hard, but have the choice of, okay, I need this. I'm going to kick myself into that last gear where I'll leave nothing, you know, I'll leave nothing on the field, but I'll win. And so that's what we're looking for there in the Project Endurance series. And similarly in patient care, sometimes we really need patients to push through, and other times we're like, hey, we can have an easy session. So yeah, that's kind of what's on our mind when we're thinking about that.
Oh, okay. So the combination with you having the scientific and background with the background of the athlete knowing how far they can push, how successful will future medicine be with when you mentioned Ryan being able to walk up the steps after the accident with the spinal cord, that type of data and technology that you're pushing toward the athlete to go further, how would that benefit regular folks that are trying to now get back into walking? Do you see that being something that will be corrected in the future, like everybody will be able to walk at some point no matter what?
I think we're pushing into that realm right now. There's some really exciting stuff happening in exoskeletal robotics, really interesting stuff happening in epidural spine stimulation. What we're always looking for, you know, and this is in sports performance and in rehab, it's like, we know what the ingredients are to make rehab effective, but we're always looking for these multipliers, you know, and so brain stimulation can be a multiplier. It's like, if I just give you brain stimulation, nothing will happen. But if I give you brain stimulation every day just before you do 50 minutes of intense exercise, it will increase the effect of that exercise by 50%. And so your training effects over time will get bigger and bigger. And so we're always searching for those little multipliers, because, you know, otherwise, you know, in rehab as well as in sports performance, when you put people side by side, like all the high performers, we all know this, there's so little in it between them, you know. That's why a half a second is the world in a sprint. And, you know, well, it's even less than half a second, 0.05 of a second is the world in a sprint. You know, it's because they're all so similar. And so if you can find this one thing that boosts their performance by 10%, 20%, or makes their trainings more efficient, or so on and so forth, that becomes really powerful. And it's exactly the same in rehab. If I can find this one thing that makes every single one of my sessions 50% more effective, then we're going to get some really unbelievable gains. And in the population of individuals that we're working with stroke and spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, it's just that we're trying to like just jolt their nervous system into a spot where they can learn and they can reform pathways and connections, and we can get more out of the rehab that we're putting in.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Miller, you were going to ask a question?
Yes. First, Dr. Putrino, this has been great, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us and the students. I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about the recovery tense, because you observe athletes who have an excellent game. It's like a basketball game. They come out and they perform and they're in playoffs, and they have a tough game, but you often see a letdown that second or third game. And obviously that's the challenge, right? Sustaining that output over time. And it seems as though you were saying that what contributes to that inability to have successive performance is that immediate phase of recovery after expending that energy. Can you talk about that a little bit more, and how that can be, how athletes can train so they can have more consistent, consecutive performances?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think that you know, we see it in NBA, we see it, God knows, we see it in NFL, and in so many sports, that the schedule that they're faced with, it's just gotten more and more brutal. But they haven't been given, we haven't changed their strategies for recovery all that much. And so as we start to delve into this world, it really starts to, we start to think about, I think sleep is definitely number one, between the jet lag and between just the adrenaline pumping for performing in front of, you know, somewhere between 40 and 100,000 people, and then getting off that arena and being told, okay, quick, go to sleep because you got to do it again the next day. That's intense. That has inflammation implications, immune implications, like the works, that, you know, like your entire systemic chemistry is thrown off by that sort of an experience. And I don't think that we can really fully appreciate what their bodies are going through, because, you know, well, certainly I've never sort of experienced anything quite on that level. So we thought that was the most low-hanging fruit, is can we bring their physiology down? And you know, biofeedback, neurofeedback, meditation, all of these things have great, you know, have pretty good evidence behind them for helping people bring their physiology down, but they also require a lot of training. Where when you're working with athletes, one of the biggest issues I come across when you're trying to teach one of these techniques is they're like, okay, so I got to do 40 minutes a day of this, right? Yeah, okay. Well, what percentage will I improve if I spend 40 minutes a day meditating? There is no answer to that. So whereas the rooms, what I liked about it when we designed them was they're passive. You just sit there, you can play your favorite music, you can do whatever you want. And the way they're designed passively bring your physiology down. And so that was something that we were really excited about. The athletes have been enjoying them and using them. I mean, in NBA, what I've learned is the success is measured by, are the athletes using them? You know, or are they walking by and ignoring it entirely, or are they stopping in the room and using the room? They're using the room. So that's step one, check. And so, you know, I think that that's a direction that certainly the Nets are going to keep moving in, because it seems to be really interesting. But as we think about other forms of recovery, there's there's a lot of different things getting tried out. There's like cryotherapy is big right now, breath work plus cryotherapy. People are starting to dig into CBD. I'm even starting to hear whispers about microdosing in psilocybin, so non-psychedelic psilocybin interactions. These are all things that people are exploring right now, and I think it's all focused on this idea that I think as the schedule continues to increase, recovery is going to become the most, one of the most important pieces of sports performance to allow them to maintain what they're doing.
That's great. And I guess one final thing, and I mean, some of it's obvious, but going back to what Russell was saying, what we're trying to do is we're working with these young athletes is to teach them these skills early on. One of the things that we heard on the last speaker who was speaking about nutrition, and it's just a shame that how she's still encountering athletes who are collegiate athletes who don't understand the importance of nutrition because they didn't learn it when they were young. Is there any advice that you could offer to folks who work with young people who are serious about athletics? Just some tangible things to just help them to learn how to recover and how to mentally prepare for the level of stress they're putting their bodies under at a young age, so it becomes a part of their learned abilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think as with everyone, I mean, but even more so with the younger athletes, like just good education with effective educators, so one of the most impactful things I think that we see when we're working with athletes of any age is just making sure that you're always feeding them information, like good quality information, in a way that they actually care about. And so, like you can present data and graphs and so on and so forth until the cows come home. And, people just switch off when that sort of stuff is presented to them. What I think is important is, highlighting athletes that are probably important to these younger athletes and giving them anecdotal, like concrete anecdotal examples of they did this and then they did that and so on and so forth. A really good example of this, and actually something, Reg, that we've chatted about a little bit briefly, is the Tackle Your Feelings initiative, which was all about encouraging young rugby players in Ireland to access mental health services. How did they do it? They got Irish rugby stars to lead conversations and share stories about how when they were performing at their lowest, they started working with a psychologist who helped them optimize their performance. And so they don't even touch on mental health. They don't touch it. They're just like, when I did this, I became a better rugby player. And what did they see? They saw a 3-fold increase in mental health service utilization in Ireland after the campaign ran. So always trying to create this sort of weave in this level of education, but education in context. I've learned, sadly, really early on as a scientist that no one cares about my graphs. So I'm not gonna put anyone through data. I'm just gonna say, like, here are stories. I'll publish the data, but here are stories that are relevant.
Great. Well, thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
If I can add something right quickly.
Please.
Sure.
All right. So my thoughts have been, and I'm working with high school and middle school student athletes, And on the performance side is to be able to, I would like to be able to work with student athletes to get them for them to get as good as they're going to get at the various levels, just to help them perform, to better position them to perform at the next level. So you're going to get as good as you're going to get as a middle schooler. You'll be able to perform this way. To get them to go to high school, however they're going to perform. This is not to have a failure rate in their minds. And for those that can go up the ladder to be selected, to get them to perform at the highest level, they can perform at the level that they are. Am I making sense? Because I'm always trying to build self-confidence and self-esteem. There's a lot of things on their skill at the same time, they're developing the skills at the same time. At the same time, their bodies are growing. I didn't grow into 6'1" until I was in my senior year. So I went from like 5'7" to 6'1" in 1 year. So when at the same time I began to, of course, that year I became a normal size for an athlete for me. But other guys never grew any taller. So at the same time, there's multiple levels of progression that gets slowed down and comes to a stop with their skills. So at the same time, I just want them to still be functioning individuals based on where they are. So that's my challenge. And at the same time, with the nutrition part, and then it's injury prevention, because I'm engaged where I'm looking at coaches performing dogmatically. I mean, it's like drive with no rational thought behind it other than this is what we practice. So this is, like I said, that type of intervention is needed at the high school, middle school levels, because they're thinking, fall till you die, run till you die. Yeah. So a lot of misinformation is going out there, and it's not getting any better. And when I get exposed to this type of information, it puts me in a crossroads of like having to say, like, you have to stop that. You have to stop. All right, so this is it'll take a longer talk, but I appreciate really this was on both sides, even what Dr. Miller was talking about, all the things that you're talking about are really inspiring, educational and inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So we have no more questions. We're approaching the 2:30 mark. I don't want to keep Dr. Putrino too long, but thank you so much for this rich information and the presentation. It was definitely a lot, and I learned a lot. So thank you for your time. Thank you all for coming. And we have another session next Saturday at 1 o'clock. And that will be Ryan Jones with sports psychology. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.